Hey everyone, and welcome to another tutorial by artincontext.org. My name is Matt, and in today's tutorial we'll be doing another anatomical drawing where we cover the topic of how to draw a fist. Now, drawing hands always seem complex at first, but in reality the idea is that you are slowly refining these complex structures from their most vague and generalized shapes into a more detailed and nuanced drawing. That being said, let's get into this tutorial. Now, using a pencil, what we first want to start doing is we want to start by demarcating an area on the page in which the fist will be drawn, and we can do this by just drawing a generalized circle. So this is going to help us just understand a general scale, and this is just going to help us keep the drawing to scale on the page. Now, once we've drawn that circle, what we are basically going to do is we want to make sure that we have a reference image for one. It's always good to have a reference image of anatomical structures, making the drawing process a little easier. Now, when it comes to hands, obviously a closed hand, what we are dealing with are digits or fingers in a very unique composition. And what we want to do is we want to start with a general sketch, and this is where we basically draw what we see. I know this sounds simple, but this is the best way in which you slowly refine these generalized placements of features, and then once you have that, you kind of work in tandem with your eraser and pencil to slowly refine the features until they resemble the reference image or a hand more accurately. So this is going to be the process. So using a light pencil, we want to start with a very light pencil sketch, kind of doing a general outline. And this is where we start outlining the thumb, kind of clenching over the fingers, as well as the remaining fingers kind of placed behind the thumb. Now, obviously, when a fist is obviously clenching correctly, what is happening is the thumb kind of rests over the middle section of the fingers, where they kind of bend in on themselves, resting on the palm of the hand. So this is something to bear in mind. This tends to kind of overlap either one or two fingers, but we really want to consider how the scale of the thumb obviously compares and is placed in relation to the remaining fingers, and this is important. And these are the kinds of things we want to keep in mind as we create a generalized sketch. The idea with drawing any anatomical structure is to definitely keep it light for a while. You want to kind of work with this simplistic trial period, and try to think of it as a trial drawing period where you work out the generalized placements of features, and again, I say a trial period because you'll definitely be erasing the marks in the beginning stage. So you'll end up drawing some fingers, maybe the pinky's too large or the middle finger's too small, so you'll erase it and redraw it. And this is where our observational skills start to really play an important role in terms of understanding the small factors or the small details and how they are important in an anatomical drawing, because with anatomy, obviously, we want to make it as correct as possible. So when you observe your reference image, try to consider how the bends in the knuckle kind of distort the fingers a little bit, or how the thumb has a slight twisting angle, and this kind of gives it a unique outline. These are the kinds of things you want to think about, you know what I mean? How the pinky, is placed next to the ring finger, and how high or how low it is resting next to the ring finger in relation to the palm that both fingers are resting on. So it is really important to take your time with this early sketch where you work out shape and form, placing in these digits, and just trying to basically establish them as accurately as possible. And the reason why we work with a light pencil is because as we proceed, once we have completed this light sketch, we'll erase the drawing and then start to work in more refined lines until we add in some shading for a overall more enhanced realistic drawing of a fist. Now, as you proceed with your drawing and your light pencil sketch, there are a few things that you want to bear in mind to assist you further. First of all, the hand or the skin on the hand is quite wrinkled, or it has these lines that can actually be used to help us establish placement of features. So for instance, when the thumb curls, it's creating a set of wrinkles along the finger that kind of work as little placement demarcated lines to help us establish the surrounding features. And this goes for the lines that separate each finger. This goes for the lines in the knuckles that bend, or the bending middle knuckle in each finger. Try to use these lines to kind of define where the surrounding features should be placed. So for instance, if the pinky bends and it has these wrinkle lines near the knuckle, and that's placed next to the ring finger, but those lines are kind of situated near the middle section of the ring finger. This is a great way to understand how the next set of lines for the ring finger's knuckles, and the same can be said for the wrinkles that are kind of placed in the palm of the hand. Obviously there is a kind of partition of wrinkles in the palm of the hand that separate the hand into these two larger lumbrical muscles. So there's a larger muscle that establishes the base area of the thumb, or how it like flows into the palm of the hand, and then there is another section that kind of flows into the pinky area, and then there's this indentation as the hand clenches that curves and defines these indentations that run into the center of the hand, or where the knuckles overlap the palm central area of the hand. Now take your time with this light sketch. Again, this is where we want to make sure that we're also paying attention to details such as the nail, in this case specifically the nail on the thumb, as it is quite a focal feature because it's the only nail present in the entire hand drawing. Really try to consider how your reference image represents these features. And again, we're not necessarily trying to work in shadow at this point, but we're definitely trying to have a generalized sense of finger placement, scale, how these different features define the surrounding features and where they should be placed, the size of each finger in comparison to one another, the size of the thumb in relation to the rest of the fingers, and so on and so on. So take your time with this. Now once we have this generalized sketch of the hand, we should have a kind of basic sketch of a hand at this point. We can start actually refining these lines, and this is where we start working with the eye eraser in tandem with a pencil, just to enhance the lines. And what I mean by enhance is, again, paying attention to the outline and the detailed outline of the hand represented in your reference image. So how does the thumb knuckle curve? Is it quite a sharp, like 90-degree shift in curvature as the finger bends, or is it more a subtle curve? The same thing for the surrounding knuckles, as well as the larger knuckles at the top of the hand, how they kind of protrude upwards and create these ridges along the top of the fist. So just try to think through these kinds of features and details as you continue to kind of slowly work through the entire hand drawing. And this is where you want to take time, again, slowly just working over each feature of the hand, kind of moving from one side of the drawing to the other. It's really good to kind of work from one side of the drawing, slowly working your way through one feature at a time. This way you can kind of give attention to each of the features one by one before you move on to adding in some shading. Okay, now at this point what we're going to start doing is we're going to transition to using a darker pencil. And this is where we can use a softer pencil, something like a 3B or a 2B pencil. And what we're going to start doing is we're going to start working in some soft shading, some light shading, to kind of work out how shadows are formed around a clenched fist. Now, something really important to consider is the light source. In the case of something anatomical like a hand, especially when there are a lot of overlapping features or indentations or wrinkles, light is going to interact with those surfaces in all sorts of ways. And what I mean by this is that if the light source is present obviously on the left side, what will happen is that the darker shadows will be predominantly on the right side. And this is something we understand intuitively with three-dimensional objects and how they are interacting with light source. And this is no different for a hand drawing. However, in the case of something unique, especially for anatomical structures such as hands, their surface area tends to have more subtle or more variation in their shadow formations, and this is due to all the little details and indentations and wrinkles that kind of interact with the light source in a unique way. And this is especially important for a hand drawing because it's what's going to kind of take the hand drawing to the next level and give it a more realistic effect. So when we start working in some light shading, what we want to consider is all the little details in the hand, such as the cuticles around the thumb, all the little wrinkles that flow down the finger of the thumb when it's bending, as well as all the little wrinkles in the palm of the hand, the lines in the knuckles, and so on and so on. And it's really important to consider all these features because they will be different in all areas of the hand. And obviously this means that we really want to consider how dark or how light shadows are going to be. So something really unique to think about is that the skin on a hand is basically curving due to the bone structure underneath the surface of the skin. And what that does is it also creates these more softer shadows that flow along the surface area of the finger. Now, because we're drawing a fist from the front view, what we are essentially seeing is a distortion in depth, and this is because the knuckles are in the foreground, and then the middle knuckles in the middle section of the hand is in the foreground, and then the larger knuckles in the back of the hand are obviously placed in the background. And what we want to do is, in our reference image, we want to understand and really pay attention to how the shadow formation on top of the fingers, or the shadow formation just running through each finger entirely, changes according to how the bone structure underneath the surface of the skin obviously distorts the skin and therefore allows it to change direction and face different directions. And some surface areas are going to be more exposed, and then other surface areas on the fingers are going to be less exposed. So these kinds of shadow formations, especially in the curling of the fingers, start to shift from the top of the finger to the middle area of the finger near the bending section in the middle knuckle. So these are really important things to think about. Obviously, these shadows start to become slightly more darker near the curling area of the finger as it kind of curls into the palm. So trying to create a distinction of tonal value between the more exposed areas of the skin and the less exposed areas of the skin within the fingers is going to create a massive enhancement in the realistic nature of how this fish drawing ultimately ends up. Now, this process of understanding the actual anatomical nature of the skin whilst we still adding in some shading with our pencil is something we want to keep in mind as we go through the entire hand drawing. It's not just about understanding how the different bone structures in each finger bend and therefore cause a distinction between tonal variations in different areas of the finger. It's also something that we want to consider in the palm of the hand, the areas that are more exposed or where the shadowing is slightly more subtle near the more exposed areas that would be more exposed to light, and how they become more darker as they are less exposed to light. And the same goes for the bones that run through the wrist area. Obviously, you don't necessarily need to draw in the wrist for fish drawing, but it is advisable in terms of just contextualizing the fist entirely as a holistic structure. Now, I would say really take your time with adding in some pencil shading, because the next process is working in some pen shading. The pen shading process doesn't need to be difficult, but we do want to make sure that we have completely shaded in the fish drawing with our pencils to assist us really effectively in the pen shading process, as the pencil lines will guide us as we proceed with adding in some refined pen marks. So some important things to think about as you add in some pencil shading marks. Think about how the bone structure is distorting the surface of the skin. So this is creating subtle curves and harsh curves. How the more dense skin areas, such as in the palm of the hand, become more wrinkly as the fist curls in on itself, as well as the skin near the curling of the thumb. We also want to think about the nail of the thumb, how it has different tonal values due to its cuticle, due to the surface area of the nail, as well as the lunula in the nail, that white area. And it is really important for you to make sure that you're really understanding the anatomy of the hand as you're drawing. It's going to just enable you to create this drawing a little bit more effectively, because you have a more fundamental understanding of what's actually going on in the structure of the hand. So understanding the anatomy, understanding how that shifts according to the unique composition of a clenched fist, and understanding how light interacts with that structure to create a unique variety of shadow formations within the various features of the hand. Now, once you have completed that, we can slowly transition into working with our pens. And this is where we actually just use our pencil marks or pencil shading to assist us in just darkening these features. Working with ballpoint pen is the most effective because it works quite similar to a pencil in that the ink comes out quite sparingly, so it gives us a lot of autonomy and control over our mark making within the drawing. And that is particularly important for something like anatomy, because we want to have a variety of shadows. We don't want to accidentally make dark lines. We can also have a scrap piece of paper nearby to scribble on as we proceed with our pen drawing process, to get rid of any excess buildup of ink in the pen before adding marks. So again, what we're going to do is work over this basically completed fist drawing done in pencil, slowly working from one side of the hand and transitioning all the way to the other side of the hand. Now again, when we utilize pen work, we're not necessarily trying to recreate new marks. However, we can obviously, as we go, if we feel that we need to, as we go back and forth between the reference image and the drawing. But what we are primarily trying to do is just enhance or darken or add more contrast to the already existing pencil shading marks. Now, for instance, some things to think about again is what are the distinctions between lighter shadow formations in the hand and darker shadow formations in the hand, and what are causing these distinctions between darker and lighter shadows. So again, we want to think through the details. For instance, as we slowly work through the thumb, we want to think about how the thumb curls in on itself and therefore creates a variety of different wrinkles. Some of them are really indented and therefore are going to be much more darker than others, whereas some of them aren't really indented, or there is no overlapping skin, and therefore, you know, light is interacting with that surface a little bit more, so the shadow is going to be lighter. So we really want to think about all these little details to that degree, and the reason why we do this is it's just going to make the drawing more realistic as we slowly transition from one side of the hand to the other. Now, when we come to the knuckles, some things we want to think about again is how the knuckles or the bones in the middle area of the hand that cause the fingers to downturn and then curl in on themselves are obviously bulging, and this is because the knuckle bone is slightly thicker than the connecting bones between each joint in the finger. So these middle knuckle bones obviously do protrude and therefore create these circular structures, and we want to kind of utilize our pen shading to emphasize these circular structures. Again, it's the same idea of just keeping in mind where the light source is present and how this is going to affect shadow formation along these surfaces. But if we understand that the knuckles kind of have this circular protruding or bulging effect beneath the surface of the skin, we then understand that our shadow formation is going to be more circular as opposed to straight, and these are the ways in which we really want to make sure we understand the anatomical nature of the hand, and therefore give us a better opportunity with our shading process. But otherwise, guys, this is the basic process of how to draw a hand. This process we will continue throughout the entire hand. The main takeaways from here are to make sure you proceed with your pen shading process the same way you have with your pencil shading process. The other thing we want to think about is the light source, and from which direction the light source is present, and therefore how this is going to affect shadow formation in the hand. But not only where the shadows are going to be most prominent, but how the hand's clenching, closing in on itself composition creates darker shadowing in these areas that would struggle to have or be exposed to light. And this again is going to continue throughout the entirety of the hand drawing, and this process is the same for when you're adding in pencil shading as well as when you're going over your pencil shading with pen marks. Other than that, it's simply a matter of being patient, taking your time, and then lastly and most importantly is your observational skills of your reference image. So if you're working with a reference image, it's really important for you to pay attention to details. I know that sounds simple, but it's really the most important aspects of anatomy based drawing, where you're really working with unique details. Other than that, that's it from my side, guys. I hope this tutorial was helpful. I hope there were some concepts and ideas and processes to apply to your own drawing process when it comes to anatomy drawing. Hand drawings are particularly unique, and we'll cover different types of hands in the future. But otherwise, if you have liked this video and you found that it was helpful, please like and subscribe. This helps us a lot. Until next time, cheers.